Good morning. Welcome yet again to another edition of Inquisition Update. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Good morning, good morning. We're wrapping up the week here at Inquisition Update, and we're talking about the events that transpired immediately after the exposure of the Jesuit Constitution in the courts of France as a result of a declaration of bankruptcy by a Jesuit priest, and suggested that he wasn't liable for his debts because of the Jesuit Constitution, which forbade him to own any personal property. And this placed the Constitution of the Jesuits within the realm of the court for investigation. And the Jesuits were forced to produce their Constitution, where it was read and comprehended by the court of France and then made public. And this is when all France, and for the first time in Jesuit history, the world became aware of what really is written in the Constitution of the Jesuits. And they found out, the whole world found out what the purpose of the Jesuit order is. World conquest, inciting wars, inciting assassinations of heads of state, that it was not a religious order at all, that it was a military order designed to conquer the world and to prepare it for the rule of a single man, a global government under the headship of a pope of their choosing. The world for the first time comprehended what the Jesuit order was really all about. And being a Roman Catholic country, this is not a Protestant country, France. France is a Roman Catholic country. Okay, a little difficulty this morning. We'll continue now. Remembering that France is a Roman Catholic country. The Parliament of France is Roman Catholic. Yes, there were Protestants living in the country. They were tolerated, and they were in the background silent, as this Roman Catholic country is discovering what the Jesuit order is really all about. And the Parliament of France, a body composed only of those who maintain the faith of the Church of Rome, that is, Roman Catholic, they placed an order that the institutions of the Jesuits should forever cease to exist throughout the whole extent of the Kingdom of France, and that also the Jesuits were no longer allowed to teach in the schools. Remember, the great educators, the Jesuit order, the great educators. Remember, Roman Catholicism, by matter of Roman Catholic canon law, arrogates to itself the sole responsibility to educate. The area of education belongs strictly to the Roman Catholic Church. All education systems in the world must conform to the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. That's a matter of canon law. That can be investigated by my listeners to determine the truth of that statement. Roman Catholic canon law arrogates to the Roman Catholic Church alone the responsibility of education. No matter where, whether it's in a Roman Catholic country or a Protestant country or anywhere else, if Rome has the power, Rome takes control of education. And the education of the children was delegated by the Roman Catholic Church to the Jesuits. And that's why the Jesuits are known as the great educators. They approve the textbooks, they write the curriculum, and they set the syllabus for a study in this country. This is why the United States in particular is oblivious to what the Jesuit order is. They may have heard about the Jesuits, but they know absolutely nothing about it. That's because all the history of the Jesuits have been stripped from the history books in all the schools in this country. They've protected themselves so that no one ever catches on to the influence that they have, not just in education, but in every other realm of government and economics and communications, press, and everything else. All right? They were no longer allowed to teach in the schools, and they were no longer allowed to recognize the authority of the Jesuit general. Remember, every Jesuit is like a cadaver that the Jesuit general can move about to do whatever he wants, and that the Jesuit responds to his every whim because he is like a cadaver, has no will or thought of his own, and obeys the Jesuit general without equivocation or mental reservation, and he obeys the Jesuit general's commands instantaneously like a little tin soldier. No heart, no brain, no nothing. They're not allowed to own personal property. They're not allowed to have friends and family influence. They're not allowed to pledge allegiance to any nation. Their only allegiance is to their Jesuit general. Now, the court of France understood this. The Parliament of France understood this by reading this constitution of the Jesuits. And so, France intended to cut off all communication between the Jesuit general and all of his cadavers, the Jesuit order. And the Parliament of France also forbid the Jesuits any longer to wear the robes of a priest. The French Parliament understood that these are not priests. These are not religious. That's simply a cloak behind which they exist as a military order. Strictly a military order. They use a pretense of religion to arrogate to themselves some means of respect and authority. But without the garb of the priest, they are what they are. An insidious, diabolical military order designed, in this case, to overthrow the government of France. And the Roman Catholic country of France put a stop to it. Now, this is justification for something that I always say on the program, and I'm afraid many of my listeners misunderstand. This is justification why I say that if the United States has a hope in Hades of stopping this Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order and the overthrow of our Protestant form of government, our republic, our Protestant institutions, our Protestant Bill of Rights, and our way of life, if the United States has any hope at all, they must take the same course as the Roman Catholic country of France. And it is just, the example of the United States today is just exactly like it was in France. The Protestants are silent. It's up to Roman Catholics in this country to become aware of the history of the Jesuits, particularly in this case of their machinations in France, to recognize what the Jesuits are doing in this country, and to demand that the papacy do what Pope Clement XIV is about to do during this period of time, to abolish the Jesuits, to do what the Parliament of France did, strip them of any authority to teach in the schools, get them completely out of education, to demand that they no longer communicate with their Jesuit general, and to prevent them and to forbid them any longer to wear a religious dress, to wear the robes of a priest. It's up to Catholics in this country. I've said it before. The ecumenical evangelibellies in this country want to reunite with the Roman Catholic Church. They think that the Roman Catholicism is Christianity, and that there ought to be peace and unity with the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church. Just another denomination of Christianity, when it's not Christianity at all. It's the Church of Antichrist. It is exactly what the Protestant Reformers said it was. The synagogue of Satan, headed up by the man of sin, the son of perdition, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist. But the ecumenical evangelibellies, having lost their minds, are now drunk with the wine of her fornication, want to reunite with that Roman Catholic Church, the Church of Antichrist, what help would they be to help save this Protestant nation, this Protestant nation, from becoming a Jesuit enclave? What hope would they be? They're just as silent against the Jesuits as were the Protestants in France at this time. It was up to Roman Catholics to take care of business in France, and it's up to Roman Catholics to take care of business in the United States of America. They've lived under a Protestant constitution. They enjoy their liberties: freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom to keep and bear arms, freedom to address the government for grievances, redress of their grievances. They love the right to vote. That's not given to them in Roman Catholic countries. Okay? The Pope picks all the kings of the earth. If they love their liberties, if Roman Catholics love their liberties like the French enjoyed their liberties in France under their republic, they're going to have to kick the Pope and the Jesuits out of their country. They claim the United States as their country, but they're serving two masters. And the Pope realizes that, and the Jesuits realize that just like everybody else. So if they love the liberty that they have enjoyed in this Protestant country, they need to do what the Catholics did in France: kick the Jesuits out and forbid them ever to return. Get them out of education. No longer should the Department of Education of this country be headed up by a Roman Catholic subservient to the Jesuit order. The curriculums of the schools and universities of this country should be established by the people of this country who love their Protestant liberties and their Protestant constitution and their Protestant institutions, their Protestant way of life. No longer should a Roman Catholic who has a split loyalty between this country and the Pope of Rome, who have Jesuits as confessors, no longer should they be authorities over our education system. No longer should they pour through the textbooks and approve and disapprove certain textbooks to be used in our schools. No longer should the history of Protestantism and the history of Jesuitism be suppressed in our schools. It's time for the people of the United States to know the truth of history, so that they can see through history the fulfillment of Bible prophecy, so that through education they'll come to the same conclusions that I've come to after over a decade of day and night research into this matter. France came to the conclusion that the Jesuits were nothing but trouble after they read their Constitution, the Jesuit Constitution. I demand that if anybody intends to solve the issues that threaten our way of life in this country, that they demand that the Constitution of the Jesuit order be exposed to the media, the mainstream media in this country, be exposed to our government, be read in all the mass media resources in this country, that this country be educated, as was France at this time, what is actually in that Constitution. We've got Jesuit priests running up and down the halls of the Supreme Court, of the Congress, in the White House. We've got them advisors. We've got them running the most prestigious universities in this country, being the confessors to the most powerful people in our government, under their control, their spiritual guidance, and every other thing. The Jesuit universities, their law schools, writing the legislation that's passed in our Congress and signed by our president into law. It's Roman Catholic canon law. There's nothing Protestant about it. They're making America Catholic by law. Vatican control through civil law. France got it right. This Roman Catholic country got it right, and we need to follow their example. And nobody better than the Catholics of this country to get it done. The Protestants just want to have lovey-dovey with the Roman Catholic Church. They want to go back to Egypt under the iron rod of Pharaoh in Rome. They don't like the provision that Jesus made for them and the liberty that he provided, bringing them out of slavery after the Protestant Reformation. No, they want to go back to Rome. They want to go back to Holy Mother Church. They want to pretend to have peace and unity with the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist in the synagogue of Satan. They want, again, to serve two masters. Well, God's not going to have it. So if the Protestants can't wake up to reality, then it's up to the Catholics of this country to defend our liberty and maybe to liberate themselves from a dual loyalty from to this country and to their Pope, and learn what it is to live free in Christ Jesus like a true Protestant. That's the hope of Inquisition Update. I hope more and more Catholics begin to listen to this program and quit listening to it from a defensive posture and begin to recognize me as a potential friend. Listen, the truth is our friend. The truth is everyone's friend. And the truth is Jesus Christ, and the truth is the liberty that He brought us through His sacrificial gift of salvation. And we can save this country if we'll awaken to that which threatens us most, and that's the Jesuit order. It was the greatest threat in France, the greatest threat in Spain, the greatest threat in Portugal, the greatest threat in England, the greatest threat in all Europe, and they all took steps to kick the Jesuits out once and for all. You didn't hear anybody arguing Democratic and Republican politics right here in France. No, the Parliament of France was united. The Parliament of France understood the problem. The Parliament of France manned up and addressed the situation directly and demanded that the Jesuits get out of France. They knew what was going to solve their problem. Get rid of the Jesuits. America needs to follow France's lead. Amazingly, America, Protestant America, needs to follow the example of Roman Catholic France. I want my listeners to wrap their brain around this. They said that the Jesuits should forever cease to exist throughout the whole extent of the kingdom of France. They prohibited them from teaching in the schools, and they were no longer to recognize the authority of the Jesuit general, and they were no longer to wear a religious dress. The Parliament of France addressed every issue with the Jesuits, telling everyone in France, these people aren't priests, so strip them of their priestly garments. Let's not let them run around in the country under the pretense of being religious priests. Let's not genuflect and cross ourselves every time a Jesuit priest shows up. He's not a priest, he's a militia. He's one of the most malignant, malicious, dangerous members of the most sophisticated, the most powerful, the most devious military organization on the planet that intends to control the governments of the world, just like they're intending to control the government of France at this time and the United States today. Strip them of all their religious garb. They are what they are. They're not religious. They're a military order. Cut off their communication with the Jesuit general. Now, I don't know how we would propose to do that today. Well, I have an idea, but it's probably not fit for publication. Stop all communication between the Jesuits and their general. It's pretty easy. We could do like Chris Strunk says. We should recognize the Jesuit order for what they are. Emissaries for the most hostile foreign power in the world against the United States. That's the papacy. And that they're all spies. And that they're all infiltrators and agitators, and have one goal in mind, and that is to conquer the whole world for an eventual rule by a single man of their choosing. That they are diametrically opposed to our free institutions, and that they should be recognized by our government as such, and they should be registered, each and every one, by an official Protestant organization in our government, not the CIA, Catholics in Action, but they should be registered as ambassadors for a foreign potentate. And their whereabouts should be known on a constant basis. And if they do or say anything contrary to the sovereignty of this nation, they should be registered as hostile to the government, loaded on ships, set adrift, so that God and the wind can determine their fate. And all that's in lieu of just outright assassinations. France was charitable and let these Jesuits live, and they came back and they constantly asserted themselves over the government of France. France couldn't keep them out. It looks to me like history has indicated the only solution that's viable to get rid of Jesuit influence in the country. I don't believe in killing. My God's law says thou shalt not kill. But I regard the Jesuit order as the most lethal threat to the sovereignty of this nation, the life of this nation, and the lives of its people. And I think a drastic situation like this demands a drastic solution. At the very least, they should be ordered out of the country with a red X on the calendar that if you're not out of this country by this time, you're toast. Empty Georgetown University, empty Fordham University, empty Boston College, empty every single one of the 28 Jesuit universities in this country, and take all of their graduates out of any position of responsibility in our government. If they've been tainted with Jesuit education, they're not fit to serve the people of this country. They're not fit to sit in public office in this country. Whether it be in Washington, D.C. or Main Street, USA, not even in the school board, especially not on the school board. I hope I'm getting the message across. I hope the people don't just hear what they might describe as the hatred in my voice. Look, this is justifiable indignation against an organization that has demonstrated its vile character ever since its founding in 1540 A.D. An organization that has sworn a bloody oath to destroy Protestantism and every institution that arose out of the Protestant Reformation. You can't deal with an organization like that by platitudes and by milquetoast attitudes. We'll be back right after this.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a Left Behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back to the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. We're talking about what France did as a result of the exposure of the Jesuit Constitution to public knowledge. They did what America should do. They kicked the Jesuits out of their country, stripped them of any power to teach the children of their country, stripped them of their religious dress and forbid them to communicate with their general. Now, obviously, this didn't stand with Pope Clement XIII. Pope Clement XIII, just like every pope, recognized the papacy can't survive without the Jesuits. And so Pope Clement XIII immediately went to the defense of the Jesuits against France. It says, Pope Clement XIII, feeling himself powerful enough to resist this decree of France, endeavored as a friend of the Jesuits to break its force by issuing a counter-decree of his own. At this point, it is worthy to remark that the parliamentary decree against the Jesuits had reference to the temporal affairs of the nation and did not in any way interfere with the religious faith of the Roman Catholic Church, which the French Christians, the French Catholics, continued to maintain according to their traditions and teachings. Again, this is a Catholic country. These French Catholics are not Christians, they're Roman Catholics. Now it says the decree of Pope Clement XIII, therefore, was the assertion upon his part of the pontifical right to dictate the temporal policy or the governmental policies of France. Okay, this is what the Pope demands, to be King of Kings and to meddle in the affairs of every state. Look, you can't rule the world unless you can control the governments of the world, right? It's both the goal of the Jesuits and of the papacy to seat themselves upon the throne of the earth. So they meddled in the temporal affairs, the civil affairs, the governmental affairs of France, and France wasn't going to tolerate it. No interference from the Jesuits and no interference from the Roman Catholic Church, from the papacy. They wanted to be Catholics, they wanted to be Roman Catholics in worship, but they wanted to govern their own affairs. And it said he explicitly asserted this by affixing the papal curse upon all who obeyed the decree of Parliament. Yes, there's the Pope issuing his papal thunders of condemnation and damnation and excommunication of anybody who paid any respect to the decision of the French Parliament to kick the Jesuits out of the country, to get them out of the education system of France, to strip them of their monastic robes, and to cut off their communication with the Jesuits. Pope Clement XIII had to come to the rescue of the Jesuits in France and had, if necessary, to overthrow the government of France to protect the Jesuits. Okay, Pope Clement XIII is clearly an ally of the Jesuits. He explicitly asserted this by affixing his papal curse upon all who obeyed the decree of the French Parliament and by declaring it to be null, inefficacious, invalid, and entirely destitute of all lawful effect, unquote. In other words, just overthrowing the law of France, and by releasing all who had sworn to observe it from the obligation of their oaths. He absolved every member of the Parliament of France, absolved them of their oath to serve the king. I am King of Kings. This king of France is rebellious against the almighty throne of the Pope, and I absolve you from all your oaths of fidelity and patriotic duty to the King of France. You serve me and me alone. Okay? That was done all throughout history. The papacies absolved Roman Catholics from their loyalties to their country and to their governments whenever it served the Pope's best wishes. Okay? And it says, in the face of this pontifical mandate, however, the decree of the French Parliament was executed. That's right, nobody was intimidated by this fat little man in Rome with a funky fish head hat. The French Parliament, Roman Catholics in the French Parliament executed their order, and 4,000 Jesuits were driven out of Paris. Would to God that Congress of the United States would do the same as the Parliament of France. Would to God that the Catholics in the Congress of the United States were as manly as the Roman Catholics in the parliaments of France. They kicked the Jesuits out, and 4,000 of them beat feet out of Paris. 4,000 Jesuits. Did Paris need 4,000 Jesuits? Well, listen. If the Jesuits are responsible to control the governments of the world and the parliaments of the world, yeah, it takes 4,000 Jesuits to control Paris. But even in spite of the influence of 4,000 Jesuit priests, Parliament did the right thing and kicked these Jesuits out. Now, Pope Clement XIII was incensed at this, you might imagine, the God of this world being defied by the puny little Parliament of France. Pope Clement XIII was incensed at this and issued a formal bull in praise of the Jesuits and in denunciation of their opposers. Okay? The Parliament suppressed this bull and refused to permit it to be printed in France. How's that for, freedom of speech? The French Parliament denied the Pope his freedom of speech, his freedom of expression. They censored the news and they wouldn't let the papal bull be published in France. You talk about justice. He said the Parliament of X, and I mispronounced that yesterday. X is a province in southern France. It says the Parliament of X went even further by having it torn up by the executioner and publicly burned, and by inviting Louis XV, the king, to, quote, avenge himself on the court of Rome and the Pope. So the Parliament, the government authority of X, burned the Pope's bull. What a wonderful thing! They burned the Pope's bull, and this same Parliament of X advised Louis XV that he ought to avenge himself on the court of Rome and the Pope. In other words, wage war. Mount up an army, go to Rome, and make war against this court of Rome for attempting to overthrow the legitimate government of France by attempting to assert the Jesuit authority over the government of France. That the legitimate king of France, Louis XV, had every right to go to Rome and to make war against this papal court and to make war against the papacy itself. Remember, these are French Catholics. See what the Catholics of this country could do? If they finally got fed up with papal interference, but they're not even aware of papal interference. They're not told by their bishops and priests that those Jesuit priests running up and down the halls of Congress in the United States control the government, and they're the ones responsible for us losing our liberties, our freedom of speech, freedom of the press. They're the ones who are causing the financial collapse of this country. They're the ones that are forcing us to accept a communistic, socialistic-style healthcare system. They're the ones who control all the information that we get in our schools and keep us blind to these histories that we're reading right now of how Roman Catholic countries stood up. Roman Catholic countries all over Europe stood up and demanded that the papacy abolish the Jesuit order. They were fed up to here. They were okay with being Roman Catholic, but they absolutely would not allow the papacy or the Jesuits to take over their governments. It says the Parliament of X went even further by having the papal bull of Pope Clement XIII torn up by the executioner and publicly burned, and they invited King Louis XV to avenge himself on the court of Rome and the Pope. Now, the King of France, however, was weak enough to suffer himself to be prevailed upon to allow a synod of the clergy, that is, an enclave of Roman Catholic clergy, to convene themselves under the pretense of putting an end to the disputes between civil and religious powers. Okay, this is a conflict between civil and religious powers. The papacy and the Jesuits are trying to unite church and state and assert the church's authority over the state and to make the Jesuits all powerful to control the government. France said no. The French Parliament said no. No union of church and state. The Jesuits are not going to dictate to us our temporal policies of France. But the king, obviously in an attempt to demonstrate fairness in his actions in this count, allowed Roman Catholic clergy to assemble to discuss the matter. Okay? It says the disputes between that the King of France, however, was weak enough to suffer himself to be prevailed upon to allow a synod of the clergy to be convened under pretense of putting an end to the disputes between civil and religious powers, as if such a thing were then possible without submission to Jesuit dictation, backed as the society was by an irritable and impracticable pope who had vainly supposed himself powerful enough to check the tide of indignation then beating against the Jesuits. And look what this convention of Roman Catholic priests did. It says, impressed by the opinions and policy of Pope Clement XIII, this synod of priests, this synod of clergy, adopted a course favorable to the Jesuits. Who would have thunk it, right? adopted a course favorable to the Jesuits by endeavoring to change the issue. Okay? They wanted to take the Jesuits right out of issue. Reframe the debate, put the blame on somebody else. And here's what they did. It says they adopted a course favorable to the Jesuits by endeavoring to change the issue so as to conceal the real question. And it says, with the view of making it appear that the church itself and even Christianity was in danger, they fulminated anathemas against the works of the French philosophers, of Bayle, Helvetius, Rousseau, and Voltaire, and of the encyclopedists, thereby furnishing arguments which have ever since done Jesuit service by misleading the unwary into the belief that Christianity and Jesuitism are of synonymous meaning, and that the destruction of the latter would be the death of the former. That destruction of the Jesuit order would result in the destruction of Christianity, or rather Roman Catholicism. And that's true. And this is why Pope Clement XIII is so vehemently attempting to defend the Jesuit order. The papacy knows that it cannot survive without the military order of the Jesuits to sustain them in the world and to promote their global government. He says they, moreover, tried to favor the Jesuits by declaring, quote, that the church alone had the right to teach and instruct children. Did you hear that? That the Roman Catholic Church alone has the right to teach and instruct children. You don't have any right to determine what the schools teach your children. They're not your children. They belong to the papacy through the state. And the state determines what your children should be taught, and the Pope determines what the state determines what your children should be taught. I hope I haven't confused you. What we're talking about is Roman Catholic canon law, and I explained this earlier. Roman Catholic canon law dictates that only the papacy has the authority to educate children, and that the Roman Catholic Church delegated that teaching authority to the Jesuit order. That's why there are so many Jesuits in Washington, D.C., and they're so concerned about the education system in this country, because they are saddled with the canonical responsibility to educate the children to make them fit for a global government, a global papal government. And again, this is why this country, the people of this country, the children of this country know nothing about the Protestant Reformation. They know nothing about the Jesuit order. They know nothing about the diabolical history of the popes or the Roman Catholic Church or their false doctrines or their wine, the wine of their fornication, idolatry. They know nothing of it. As a matter of fact, the Jesuits are so effective in their control over education, they've instructed the seminaries not to teach Protestantism anymore. That Protestant pastors should be viewed as hateful if they stand up in a pulpit in a Protestant church and enumerate all the innumerable sins and crimes of the papacy and expose the Jesuit order to the world. To them, that's religious bigotry, to hatred, and it goes against this necessary ecumenical unity that is absolutely key to the survival of the Pope's New World Order. That's right, they control what your pastor teaches from behind the pulpits in your ecumenical evangeli-belly church. And they do it through controlling the curriculum in the seminaries. Remember, Roman Catholic canon law puts education in the sole jurisdiction of the papacy. And that teaching authority is delegated to the Jesuits. That's why they arrogate to themselves the responsibility and the permission to infiltrate all the seminaries to make sure that dispensational futurism is taught, so that the papacy is exonerated from being recognized by the Protestant and Catholic world as the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, and that Antichrist is a figure that won't show up until the last 7 years before Christ returns. They also make sure that when this is taught, eventually they will recognize that if the Pope is not, as the Protestant Reformers all unanimously declared, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, then the Protestant Reformation was the gravest assault against the throne of Almighty God and His vicar in Rome. That the Protestant Reformation was not only a crime against the throne of God, but that the Pope is indeed, as he claims, the replacement of Christ on the earth, the legitimate Christian authority in the world, and should rule the world in Christ's stead. And not only that, but the Protestant nations of the world and the Protestant governments that evolved from the Protestant Reformation should use the vast resources of their nation to make reparation to the papacy. As like I had in our discussion on Lori Berkebile's program last night, Lori's Talk News Radio. That's what the United States has been doing for all of its modern history, is making reparations to the papacy for the Protestant Reformation. Now acknowledged by the Protestants as being a mistake, that they've believed in the Jesuit lie called dispensational futurism, where Antichrist doesn't come until the last 7 years before Christ returns. Then it can't be the Pope, it can't be the papacy, as said all the Protestant Reformers. The Protestant Reformation then was a heinous crime against the legitimate authority of Christ on the earth, the papacy, and that the Protestants owe not only an apology to the Pope and not only an apology to Christ, but they need to make reparations by restoring to the papacy all of his temporal and spiritual power in the world. And that's what the United States government is involved in. The United States military, they don't fight wars to maintain our national sovereignty, to maintain our rights, and to spread liberty throughout the world. No, they fight papal proxy wars. And out of every war comes more control or more demand and more need for a global government. How convenient is that for the Pope? The United States is making reparations to the papacy by conquering all the other nations of the world. This is why the United States has a police force, a military force in just about every country in the world. We've become the global governor of the world. Is that important to you? That our government serve as the police force for the world? Is that important for me? No. I'm not about building an empire. It was God who separated the nations at the Tower of Babel. Naturally, we should assume that God expected them to have sovereignty. So why are we going about, the United States government's military, going about the world, conquering, building a global empire? And for who? Certainly not for you, not for me. They're doing it for the Pope. They're making reparations to the papacy, reparations for the Protestant Reformation. See what dispensational futurism gets us? This idea that the Pope's not Antichrist. The Protestant Reformers were wrong. The papacy is not the Antichrist. The Roman Catholic Church is not the synagogue of Satan. The Protestant Reformers were wrong. Martin Luther, Melanchthon, all the Protestant Reformers were wrong. They should have stayed in the Roman Catholic Church. And we should go back to the Roman Catholic Church. We've done the throne of heaven an injustice by the Protestant Reformation. That's what they want us to believe. Of course, they don't come right out and tell us that, because that would wake up our Protestant gumption. They just told us a lie, that the papacy is not the Antichrist. No, it's somebody that looks like Mitt Romney, real tall, dark, and handsome, deep-set eyes, dark, sinister-looking eyes with graying temples and a three-piece suit and a Learjet that hustles him all over the country. He's going to make a peace treaty with the Jews. A 7-year peace treaty with the Jews. And halfway in the middle of it, he's going to break that treaty. He's going to cause the sacrifices and the oblations to cease in Jerusalem. And then we'll know who the Antichrist is. Okay? and something really bad's going to happen to this guy that looks like Mitt Romney that signs a 7-year peace treaty with the Jews, stops the animal sacrifices, the whole world recognizes him as the Antichrist, and guess who comes in to save the day? The papacy. The true biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist. The Protestant reformers were right. The United States owes no reparations to the papacy. The United States military needs to come home out of all the other nations of the world, quit trying to conquer the rest of the world for the Pope, come back to this country, man up, gear up, lock and load, and prepare for a Spanish armada to this country, because if we ever come to our senses, the papacy and the Jesuit order is going to harness the power, the military might, the economic might of every other country under their influence to destroy this country lock, stock, and barrel, and we better be prepared to defend ourselves. I hope I'm making sense to somebody. I hope this is not going so fast that you just can't keep up with it. But R.W. Thompson is trying to tell us a Roman Catholic country had the good sense to kick the Jesuits out of their country, and a Protestant America certainly ought to follow their lead. Because if we don't, the scenarios that I've just painted for you become not only possible, they become a likelihood. Satan's going to have his new world order. How long it lasts, I don't know. But this new world order is a done deal. It's already up and running. The United States government is still in the Middle East conquering, going forth, conquering, and to conquer for the Pope, who they insist is the vicar, the replacement of the Son of God on earth. And we owe him a huge debt because of the Protestant Reformation and the power and authority that it stripped from the papacy. And guess what? The Pope, realizing the truths of history and what damage the Protestant Reformation did to the papacy, nearly destroying it, nearly destroying the whole Roman Catholic Church, he's never, ever going to allow Protestantism to ever get a foothold in this country again, and that means only one thing: an inquisition to every Protestant country in the world to put a final end to any protest against the Pope. That's why this program's called Inquisition Update. And that's why you ought to listen every day and pray that the rest of God's people wake up to this reality, this hideous reality. We've been deceived by dispensational futurism. We need to correct our ways, and we'll start again Monday on Inquisition Update.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left-behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.